All right, today I'm going to share with you how to sew the binding on something by machine. One way. There's lots of ways to sew it on by machine. So we're going to sew our binding to the front. This is the front of the project. We're going to sew it to the front, we're going to wrap it around to the back, and then we're going to finish it off by machine that way. You can sew the binding to the back, flip it around to the front, and sew it on and top stitch it on. That works too, but that is not what I'm going to do today. So first we're going to attach it to the front. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and remember my technique here is, well, let me get a little further so you can see. This is the edge right here. I need a couple stitches more. Okay, and then take this binding. You want the corner of the binding to be right at the corner of the quilt, and you need it to come straight. This line right here needs to be straight. Not like this, not like this. It needs to be straight. And I'm going to just finger crease right there. Fold it down. If you can't see the crease on camera, well, you can kind of. You're going to sew to the crease. This works no matter, as long as you've got a consistent seam allowance when you turn. Doesn't matter what your seam allowance is, this will work. Okay, I'm right in the crease right there. Now I'm going to turn, and I'm going to stitch right to the point. I'm going to cut my thread. I'm going to trim off where I started to. Okay, now we're going to turn the corner. Okay, you should be able to just fold it back right on that crease that you made. And then pull, and again, this needs to be straight all along here. If it's not straight, fix it. This is what your miter should look like. If it doesn't look like that, fix it. I'm going to start right on the edge with the same seam allowance that I started on the other side. Now I got to adjust. Okay, now again, I'm at the next corner. Fold it back, press it just with your fingernail, making sure that this edge with the binding all the way along, that this edge is straight. The binding goes straight with the edge of your project. If it doesn't and you crease it wrong, you're going to be sewing this miter wrong, and there's no recovery from sewing it wrong. Sew to the crease. All right, turn, sew to the corner, flip the thread, repeat. we are at corner number 3. Corner number 4. Oops. And on this one, I'm not going to sew all the way because we got to join the ends. And I'm going to stop right there. And I will backstitch there. I didn't when we started in case I didn't leave enough of a tail. You can rip back much easier if you don't backstitch. So I recommend don't backstitch on at least one of those, start or finish. I usually don't backstitch on the start. Okay. All right, we're going to come away from the machine and I'm going to show you how to join your 2 ends. All right, for my technique to work, the part that you're joining, these 2 ends here, needs to be away from you and the rest of the quilt down here. It does not, this is not symmetric. It does not work if you turn it the other way, okay? So the join needs to be away from you and the rest of the quilt hanging down towards your feet, okay? Then you need a small cutting mat, right? Lines or no lines. I like having lines, but it doesn't have to have lines. The lines are helpful because pick a line. I'm using the 1 line and I'm lining that up right at the top edge of the quilt. See, the 1 is right here at the edge and right there at the edge, so I know that that's straight. And then I'm going to slide it over until this edge hits one of my lines. And I wanted to give myself plenty of room. So the edge, this is the edge I started with. It's not backstitched. This is the last part. So I went this way around the quilt and ended right over here. Okay. So this first edge is not going to get cut. You can cut it if you have too long of a tail or something like that, but I did pretty good. Okay. The next thing you need to know is how wide did you cut your binding? Okay, this method works no matter what the width of your binding cut binding is, but you need to know what you cut it. I cut mine at 2 1/4. Okay, because that's the size that I like. If you do 2 1/2, this will still work. If you do 3, it will still work. You just need to know, line up right here. Okay, so this is my line that I'm lining up with. Okay, flip that part back. Take this, pull it down, and I want to measure from here the width of my binding. My binding is 2 1/4. So I am going to cut this 2 1/4 inches so that we have a 2 1/4 inch overlap. See, it overlaps by whatever the width of the binding is. Okay. And now I don't have everything I need. Okay, so it overlaps the width of the binding. And mine is 2 1/4, so mine overlaps 2 1/4 inches, the two ends there. Now, on the starting end, you want to open it up. And again, I cut this is 2 1/4 inches wide, so I'm going to, along this, the edge that's furthest away from me of the binding, which is the bottom edge, okay, of the binding, I want to measure along the top 2 1/4 inches and make a mark right there. And then I'm going to take and measure from my mark, which now I can't see my mark. Apparently the white pen's not the one I need. Okay. Let's try this again with a different marking pen. Oh, I can see it now. It's that one right there. Oh, there. We can see that much better. Okay. So this mark is 2 1/4 inches from that corner, or whatever the width of your binding is. If you cut your binding 2 1/2, then you're going to measure from here and make a mark at 2 1/2. Then take a ruler or any kind of straight edge, and you want to go from the edge of the binding, right there where your mark is, to the corner and draw the line. Just draw it on there. You're going to sew right on this line. So draw it with something you can see. Okay. Now, I don't need that anymore. We've got enough tail here so that we can do, so this piece, right side up, unfolded, make sure you don't twist it, unfold it. This one needs to come and go this way. Okay. And I recommend pinning. And if I'm recommending pinning, you should pin. Because I hate to pin. I rarely pin. So if I'm pinning, it's probably necessary. And that one I'm going to move just a tad. Okay. So what we're going to need to do is take this over to the machine, and we're going to sew right on the line, right along there. And then we'll be able to cut this off. But don't cut it off until you've tested it and made sure that it's right. Because if it's twisted or something, okay, don't cut until you're sure. So now we're going to go back over to the sewing machine and sew that. Okay, you can wad up your quilt or whatever you need. The only important part is just right here. This is the part that needs to be flat. So whatever the rest of it's doing, don't worry about it. And we're going to stitch right on the line that we drew. Okay, take the pins out now. Hopefully we won't need them again because hopefully we did it right. Okay, so take your, we've sewn that. Okay, we sewed it. Now we're going to make sure that it's right. Make sure that this is not twisted in any way, and this is not. So we know we did it right. So now we can trim this, and you can trim it by, with a rotary cutter and ruler, and I often just have this little thing still here. Get my ruler. It can be a little cumbersome, especially on small projects like this one. I just put the 1/4 inch line right on the line that I sewed. I'm going to trim that off. And then I'm going to get the iron and I'm going to press that seam open with my iron. I had to turn the iron back on, but I think it's hot enough. Yeah, it's hot enough. And then I like to just reset that. Okay. And now we have to go back to the sewing machine again and stitch right along there to close it off. Okay, so just start sewing where you left off. And when you get to where you originally started, you're going to want to backstitch. Okay, so now I take the time to iron it from the front. So just press the binding back. Get in the corner good. Cord is messed up. There we go. Okay, so I've ironed from the front and pressed the binding back that way. Now I'm going to flip it over. And we're going to work on one side at a time. And we're going to glue this. I like this Roxanne's glue based it. Mainly I like the container, right? This has 2 ends, a big fat one down here, so if you need to put out a glob of glue, you can use that end. This has a very nice little fine tip right there. Okay. It's not super fine like some of those Roxanne's with the really long metal thing that always gets clogged and everything. So I don't like those. And now I am going to glue, starting from this corner. I'm just going to put a little bead of glue, and you don't have to glue, you know, this all the way down. You know, not putting a ton of glue. And I go about halfway. And I'm going to fold the binding over. And I'm going to iron as I go. Now you're going to get glue on your fingers. That's why you're using washable glue. It'll wash off. It'll be just fine. You want to make sure that you're pulling the binding over to cover this stitching seam right here. Okay, we're trying to cover that. If you don't cover that, then you're not going to catch the binding on the next step. Okay, and you need to do it this way, okay, so that the miter is correct. Okay, the miter here on the front side, it's folded up underneath that way. So on the back side, we need it to go the opposite way so we don't have a big bulky corner. And so now, and you should be able to get that corner right. If it's not right now, it's not going to get more right later by magic. Okay, make sure that corner is the way you want it, and then glue it. Get the iron. Okay, I'm at the end of my glue there. Any kind of washable glue will work for this. You want it to be washable so that it's, not permanent in your project. But the container, the applicator, is the most important thing. You want to be able to get just a little bit, just where you want it, which is why I like this one. Dump that over. Now, if you try to do this without gluing it, because you're going to be sewing blind, you're not going to be able to see if you've missed it, because we're going to be sewing from the front. So that's why you really got to glue it with this method. If you don't, you're going to be flipping it over and checking, flipping it over and checking, going back. And see if you get a little bit of glue on your project. Again, this is washable. It'll be just fine. Try not to get it on your iron. Okay, last little bit. The other thing I like about this is the cap goes on there well. If you store it like that, it doesn't dry out, you can actually use the whole thing. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to stitch in the ditch right in here on the front, and that should catch the back because we're stitching right along that seam line, and we've covered that seam line on the back when we glued the binding over, and so theoretically we should catch everything. You'll need to check it and make sure. You might have to go back and do that and do a couple places again, but it'll be fine because you're doing it in the ditch. Nobody's going to really notice unless they are inspecting super closely. And I have already changed the thread on my machine to a dark brown to match my binding. You can use a different thread on the top if you want, but sometimes I have a tendency to, get over on the binding, and I didn't want to use that light, really light color because it would show a lot. So I'm trying to use something that's not going to show. So that's why I've switched to a brown. But first I'm going to go wash my hand. Okay, so I've got brown thread that matches my binding fabric, and I put it in the top end and the bobbin. Start wherever you want to start. I usually start at a corner because why not? And stitch right in the ditch. You see right there, I got out of the ditch and up on the binding. So, glad I put in a brown. You get to the corner, I just stop right at the corner, needle down, turn everything, keep going. Let's just check. So you can see right there, I'm catching the binding on the back. If you can pin this or clip this or use some other method besides glue and catch everything, then you're better than me. For me, there's not enough pins or clips. Back on the binding again. Yeah, but it's not noticeable because, again, I matched the thread. Okay, I'm coming to where I started, so let me clip these threads here. And then what I like to do, and get right there at the corner, is turn and come and sew just a couple stitches over where you started and back up, and then you're done. Okay, so the last thing you need to do is just look carefully at the back and make sure that you caught the binding everywhere with your stitching. And if you had it all glued properly, you should have gotten it. So I'm just inspecting carefully. I know it's hard for you to see because I matched the thread really well. Okay, I do have one place where I missed. Right here, I have just a little bit. It's less than an inch. And so I'll just need to stitch that right there a little bit better. And that's the only place I missed. But you cannot tell from the front at all how I've done it because I've stitched in the ditch and it's not really showing on the front at all. So I'll go back and fix that, but that is one way. There's more than one way. This is one way to sew the binding on something completely by machine.